that, we are in the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was a clarion call following the United States Civil War. And it said in the proclamation, we women will no longer have important decisions decided by irrelevant agencies. And we'll no longer send our boys off to war and welcome our husbands reeking of carnage. And in the last paragraph, Julia Ward Howe goes on, who's authored the, I hereby call for a general Congress of women to address the greater needs of peace.
Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and we are in search of the new compassionate male. I am the producer, Dennis Tardan. I am here with the founder, Clay Boykin. Hello, Clay.
Hey, Dennis, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Would you please introduce the day after women's suffrage was adopted in the United States 100 years ago to yesterday? We have this powerful light on, and would you please introduce Sandy?
Finally, yes, I get to introduce Sandy. Sandy and I met at the Parliament of the World's Religions in November of 2018, and she was the leader of the Women and Girls sector for Charter for Compassion at the time. And I was, a long story short, given the opportunity to develop a Men and Boys initiative. And the board chair said, first thing you want to do is introduce yourself to Sande Hart. She will take you under her wing and kind of show you the ropes. And so that's what Sande did. And so we'll get more into that later, but
Wonderful.
But she helped give birth to that. Yeah, and she's founded an organization called SARA, which is Spiritual and Religious Alliance and Hope, and she's worked with the United Religions International, and she's also had connections with the United Nations. So that's a very high-level overview. So let's take it away.
Oh, hi, Sandy. So tell me, what are you doing? Where are you right now in the world today on the 27th of August, 2020?
Well, hi, and thank you for having me. I am sitting in O'Neill Regional Park in Southern California under an array of amazing trees with woodpeckers and all kinds of critters roaming about. And and so it's just good to be here and be in nature in the midst of this great, crazy, chaotic
Yes.
time.
Have you noticed, Clay and I, when we've been in on this search and be there, that this is a time when the historians are going to write about that the change happened, and it isn't always pretty, it certainly is messy, but something systemic is happening. Are you feeling that?
Oh, no doubt. And I'm not only feeling that we are in such a pivotal, remarkable time, but we have a lot of responsibility here. You know, it's really all hands on deck right now. And history is going to measure how we responded in this time. How did we show up? How did we drop all of that which no longer serves us?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do we really get down to the root of the problem, the root of the violence, the root of the system that no longer works, the root of racism, wage gap, child labor and prostitution. I mean, you name it, deforestation, I could go on and on. It's time to stop the madness.
Yes. And get us an opportunity to be able to Gloria Steinem talked about how that family violence was original violence. So we start from the family on out, and we're looking at, and Clay and I have been in exploring this, is that how do we as men show up in this new archetype, which is the compassionate male. And how do we do that to be able to be as an active participant, and compassion being an active principle rather than being a passive one? Would you talk about that, Clay?
Absolutely. Over the past, well, since Sandy, you and I met in 2018, I've been on the road in all of the United States. I've been in Kenya. And one thing that I'm beginning to understand, and this isn't the final, but if I were to say it real quickly, I can't get my arms around the concept of love. I always say it's kind of like grabbing hold of Jello, because it's so big, it's, but compassion I can grasp hold of, and to me, compassion is love in action. And that seems to translate everywhere that I go.
And where are you? So tell us about your initiative. Tell us about Sarah. Tell us about some of the things that are on your immediate windshield, and the interesting things that the places that you're playing and working right now, Sandy.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Clay, for being in search of not only the compassionate male, but in search of love. I think as long as we're in search of love, we're in love, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So to remain in love, and nothing really else matters. Nothing else exists in my world. So where am I? What's on my windshield? Well, Sarah was started in response to an impulse. A impulse that was inspired by moral outrage following the events of 9/11. So the morning of 9/11, when I was watching the same thing everyone else was watching on their television screens, and kind of make sense of it all while I was still in bed, actually, because I'm in Southern California and it was still very early in the morning. First thing I thought of is, what am I going to do with my children today? Should they go to school? Then I heard gather the women, and I'm like, who said that? And what am I supposed to do with the women once I gather them? I was the director of sales and marketing for a major home builder. I didn't know anything about gathering women. I wasn't spiritually inclined that I was aware of. I wasn't really even deeply rooted in my own religion, but I just knew that it was time to gather the women to make sense of what was going on in the world. And then my next thought was, what about Muslim women? What are they thinking right now? What do they do with their children? So Sarah was created originally to provide a safe place to bring women of different faiths, particularly Muslim women, together to dialogue with us in the community, and to demystify to look at the level of tolerance in our community, and what do we as women have to do about it? I mean, clearly the sense to circle the wagons, to come together and circle, was another impulse. Yeah. So Sarah, for the last 18 years, have been meeting in Sacred Circle. We've been responding spontaneously to the needs of our immediate community. And now, with the time of this great pause, we've been really utilizing Zoom. Mm-hmm. A moment of prayer for Zoom may continue to stay strong and connect us all. And Zoom has provided us an opportunity for those values of Sarah to lift off the page what really needs to happen right now. Sarah's grown sort of out of our adolescence, like any 18-year-old, we think we know everything. We know we're ready to take on the world. And so we thought we have to re-examine what we're doing here at Sarah with our network, with our credibility, with our experience in our relationships and our value system. And what are we going to do next? Well, we have to address that deep root system that is impacting all of us, and using technology to do it. We have a few initiatives that we're working on right now. Clay is actually going to be our speaker in our upcoming Death Throes of Patriarchy our webinar series. And that is a series of events with a trajectory of themes that lead us into understanding and recognizing not just the in-your-face patriarchy, but those subtle ways we contribute to patriarchy in our languaging, in our behavior, in our buying power, Um, and and everything we do, every breath we take, we're contributing either to the problem or to the solution. So how do we use our breath very carefully? We are also developing an initiative right now that we're launching on September 21st called the General Congress of Women. And Dennis, you were so gracious to welcome us welcome me in the spirit of the 100-year anniversary of the women's suffragist movement. Yet the suffragist movement started long ago. And yeah, of course, and yet here it took all that time, but 50 years before that, we are in the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was a clarion call following the United States Civil War. And it said in the proclamation, we women will no longer have important decisions decided by irrelevant agencies. And we'll no longer send our boys off to war and welcome our husbands reeking of carnage. And in the last paragraph, Julia Ward Howe goes on, who's authored the article, or the proclamation, she goes on to say, I hereby call for a General Congress of Women to address the greater needs of peace. And here we are 150 years later, and we think it's time. So Sarah is taking on that responsibility that I spoke of earlier. And we're saying, okay, it's all hands on deck, gathering all the women leaders. And we need to organize in a new fashion. We need to look at what we're doing and how we are collaborating, cooperating in the spirit of generosity, hospitality, in the natural organizing form of what's known as the fruit of life. And the fruit of life is a pattern that exists in all living things. So we're setting ourselves up in that pattern to organize how we solve problems, how we recognize our interrelatedness and our interdependent solutions to our interdependent problems. And I'm sorry, there is no short answer for what's on my windshield.
No,
and,
no, we're not looking for short answers. We're not looking for easy on and off switches. Clay and I have been talking as we've been, is that if we're going to move, rather than looking at it as a binary state, we have to look at it as a gradient from 0, absolute darkness, to 1 being at 1 full light, enlightenment, whatever it is. And somewhere along this journey, we are. So what is it that we can do within ourselves, knowing that the search for the new compassionate male has to be within ourselves? I can't outpicture it. I can't see, I'm not going to find it out there. I have to be willing to show up as the solution and show up and being part of it in ourselves, which is why we wanted to talk with you, so that we can see what you're doing. Because one of the things that you mentioned earlier, you talked about the word outrage. And outrage is something that many of us feel or have experienced or feel. And how can we take that and transmute it into constructive, rather than it just being this big ball of energy that then just spews out and does nothing?
Yeah, it can be a force for good and evil, can it? Outrage, right? And it depends on how you said it, how you respond to it. Do you use it constructively? And do you say, okay, this is fire that's burning in me, that's going and that is going to catapult me into action of that which is going to serve humanity? And I think your question is the same question I would ask women. Like, what are we going to do? Because women perpetuate levels of patriarchy as well.
We all do. It's all part of, we're systemic. That's the definition of, right?
Absolutely. Right now, my great call to action is to calling it out. We also have a program on racism right now, and systemic racism, and addressing it, and the subtleties of racism, which is rooted in patriarchy, of course. It's the same thing. and how do we educate ourselves to know and pay attention and listen carefully and question everything. You know, you had a guest on your program, Dr. Karambu Rangara, who
Yeah.
I just treasure.
Oh,
I mean, she's
no
just,
kidding. If she is not nominated for a no, she is in Dennis's world. In
Yeah.
Dennis's world, she's been nominated and awarded a Nobel Prize. This is what
enough.
peace looks like incarnate.
Truly. And, you know, and he says we have to question everything, listen carefully, reset, in order to regenerate, I think were the words she used. And she also said in your program, Clay, because I listen to everything you do, and Dr. Rangara, um, she said that we get people lose themselves in systems because we forget who we are. We don't even recognize our own voice because we're so conditioned to listening to the system. So
Yes.
how do we listen outside of the system? Today I was on Facebook and I saw someone giving a lot of credit to these young Black women because they were young Black women. And I'm like, this is going to be complicated, but I got to call this out. I got to call this out. No, they're extraordinary because they're extraordinary, not because they're Black women.
There.
Amen.
Those are the sort of things that could brush right over us, right? So
I'm so glad that you would say that, because me being the elder of the three of us at 72 and having been the beneficiary of of every positive thing that could be from the patriarchy over the course of my life, I've always been given the benefit of the doubt and the benefit of Clay, my younger brother, along the way, also just by virtue of who we of the genetics and our skin tone is this, that's what we are. So now how do we, I'm not asking you how because we're showing up as open, as vulnerable as we can, but can you I just would like to look at it from your perspective, looking at two men who are the absolute beneficiaries of the patriarchy and who are here to say, here is what is, we're here to help the next system come along. So anyway, so can you help me with that, Sandy?
yeah, I would say keep doing exactly what you were doing. Keep holding circles, keep doing podcasts, keep being we got to stop being the silent majority. I think there are a lot of men that are looking for you and they don't know how to take that next step. They don't know. So, sometimes you just got to start with where you're at and start with who's willing to come to the table and finding creative new ways. Sarah kind of had the same problem when we were out looking to how do we get others to the table to have the conversation, in our case about interfaith understanding and reconciliation. But the same condition exists. The same suspects show up. How do we reach those who aren't? Well, right? You follow me?
Oh God,
So
yes.
how do we crack that? How do we open up that crevice a little bit wider so those can hear? And I think we have to start speaking to those voices that have the ears of those folks.
Yes.
And I'm seeing a lot more of it in media. I'm seeing on television commercials, more stay-at-home dads playing with little girls. I'm a lot of mixed marriages. I mean, you very rarely see a commercial where the couple isn't,
I know.
Not only
It's
white.
just love it.
Yeah.
Clay, when you've talked about in the patriarchy and the threateningness that there is about this, that men are feeling threatened, that we're doing that. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that and address that?
Sure. Well, your point about,
Because we're wounded too.
Yeah, we're the privileged white Western male, and people say, yeah, you've got everything going for you. But the men are wounded as well by the patriarchy. And this isn't to diminish anybody, but the recognition that possibly the common ground is both women and men have their own wounds, all from the patriarchal system. And it seems to me that coming together and honoring and recognizing that woundedness is our commonality. And that's the place of healing together and rebuilding, rethinking things and regenerating and bringing ourselves to the next place. As it stands, there's so much polarization. There's an organization of, men that say, I'm not going to be involved with women at all. And it's, I'm not even going to go into it, but they're polarizing as opposed to seeking to understand, come together and recognize what's polarizing them is their fear and their shame. And underneath that is their brokenness. Well, we all are broken somewhat. So let's use that, recognize that, come together with that, and allow ourselves to then grow and move away from this patriarchal, move away from the polarization.
There's an awful lot said right now that we are moving into an era of the divine feminine. We're moving into that being the norm. And we're going through right now this birth canal, right? We're going through this difficult era of resistance. Yeah, neither of you have been birthed, I think it's fair to say. And I have, and it hurts like hell. Baby's coming from a nice, comfortable place of convenience and got everything it needs and everything it knows. And now it's being forced through this uncomfortable space out into a completely different world. And there's resistance, there's blood, there's screaming, and yet there's new birth. And so and so not only can we help, we say, midwife this era into being, perhaps that means continuing for you to hold that space, continue to hold that space, because I think there will be more and more waking up. Perhaps you notice more and more are waking up to this realization. You're still even young in your organizational, you've been at this how long? Really convening.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yet
8 years.
Even after 8 years, right? Even after 18 years, we feel young and we have so much more to go, but we've been holding space.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, the patriarchy, can we trace the patriarchy back to Hammurabi, the Hammurabi Code, when it was codified? Actually, I mean, can we actually do that? Because if we do that, then or maybe when the invention of private property, the idea of that, but that hasn't been that long ago. This is a maybe 10,000 years, but when we think of 10,000 years over the course of how long human beings have been here, it's a very short amount of time to do an awful lot of, a chance for us to be able to do some work here.
Yeah, Dr. Rianne Eisler wrote an incredible book called Sacred Pleasures. She's the author of The Chalice and the Blade, The Real Wealth of Nations, and she's a social scientist and an attorney, and she's an incredible, extraordinary figure. She's actually one of our speakers with Dr. Karumbu in our General Congress of Women coming up in September. She talks about patriarchy from the very start in the history, and it does go back to the era where we started owning. We started owning property. We started, and also, the female was honored. The female, there's entire civilizations that were not matriarchal; they were egalitarian in nature, and women were honored because they were the life-giving force. They were right. And it was even said that men had womb envy. That, and so when they started recognizing that they had the power to grow and to do commerce with the things that they grew out of the ground, suddenly we saw that shift of power, that shift in dominance, but we also saw our separation from our precious planet as life-giving to us being life-taking. Yeah. And so a lot happened early on.
Sure.
That needs dismantled, and that is a big, tall order.
Yes, and that's where. So if we're all right, let's say that we're remantling. So because if we can repurpose some of this, can we repurpose some of our existing because there's a sensitization that I'm seeing. So because aren't you seeing it, Clay, in the men
Yeah.
that we're touching, that we're actually seeing as we're showing up?
Yeah. Gosh, Sandy, earlier you were talking about the rise of the divine feminine. And, that's bigger than a gender thing.
I want it.
It's
I need it. I
and
need
that's
it
the
in
right,
me. I need it.
that's in the new compassionate male. The compassion source of that comes from our divine feminine energy. And yet we men have pushed that down. And so we're going out to work, we're going out to life, not fully integrated. And it's for each one of us men to bring that up to the degree that it works within our system. It's going to be different for everybody. And as Karambu said, women have got to be able to recognize their divine masculine.
Yes.
And so when I first started hearing divine feminine, I thought, okay, rise of the divine feminine. Okay, that's going to be at the expense of the guys. But no, that's not what you're talking about. It's that feminine energy.
Yes.
And so it puts us, you're saying it, the divine feminine energy, and I'm saying the new compassionate male. We're saying the same thing.
Right. And the new compassionate female.
Female, that's right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is the archetype. It's a complex, multifaceted, growing, synergistic principle.
Yeah.
Right. And gender lines and identity are so blurred right now too.
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to rethink how we think about everything.
Yes. Right. Yes. And it appears as if, all right, so how do you maintain patience at the same time taking that next step? You get up in the morning and sit there and go, okay, another day. I may not see this. I may not be the one that sees the cathedral finished, but I'm going to put my brick, and I'm going to make sure with my sisters and brothers and multi identification human beings to put this, to create this.
Yeah, the Torah says it is not my job, or actually ethics of fathers, and the Talmud says that it's not my job to complete the work, but nor can I desist from working at it. It's a commandment almost.
That's it.
I'll take it. Yeah.
Oh, and thank you.
A lot of practice, a lot of meditation, a lot of reading. My husband is sitting not too far from me, so I have to be very integrity filled with what I say. I lose my I can't take it here. I lose my patience. I yell at the TV a lot.
Yeah.
I yell at the TV a lot, and I have to really watch myself. But there's something that happens when you're doing something really important, and you just don't question it.
Yeah.
This happened to me. This feeling, I got this feeling when Sarah was started. I didn't have a choice. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know where I'm going to find these women. I don't know what to do when I find them. I just said yes, yes, yes. So we just have to keep saying yes. And then I haven't felt that way again until this time. So it seems like when there's this creative tension in the air, and that's what this moral outrage inspires. This tension, right? Something's got to give. And I used to think, well, this is the mother bear. This is a female thing. We do what we do. That, oxytocin, the tend and befriend, the gather the women, the pet each other's hair and console and come together in the red tent and figure it out together. And men, that creative tension releases the hormone of testosterone, which isn't just to go punch somebody in the face, but it's to pull a vehicle off a baby, or whatever you have to do. And so we're all gifted with a biology to respond, yet in a different way. So I don't want to hear that we're the same. I don't want to hear that women want equality, right. Or I don't expect men ever, needing to say that either. But But what we can practice is parity, equal access, equal respect, equal, honoring. Same that we do in the religious world. Honor our similarities and celebrate our differences. Yeah, it makes it much more fun.
Yeah.
Also,
And much richer and less competitive, because if I only have one job, as to show up as the most magnificent, compassionate, joyful, creative Dennis that could possibly be, if that's my only, I have no competition. There is no, I have no one to compete against other than just to be that, show up as magnificently authentic as I possibly can. Then I don't have to compare myself to Sande Hart. I don't have to compare myself to Clay Boykin. I don't have to sit there and otherize that, because I have a full-time job.
Yeah. And Dennis, sometimes I see some good stuff on Facebook. And I think it was early this morning I saw it. It was this fingerprint. I'm the only one with this fingerprint in the world. And I'm the only one that can leave the mark that I'm here to leave in the world. Nobody else can leave my mark. And so it's for me to be present, to be conscious, and to show up in that fashion.
I remember as a young girl, a young mother, actually, sitting in a congregation in temple. And we only started really getting involved in our synagogue when my kids were old enough, because I wanted to give them, their lineage and let them decide what to do with it. But I felt it was our responsibility to give that to them. And there was I think it was an applause, which you don't often do in temple. You're not supposed to applaud, but there was some reason to applaud. And I remember my hands, just clapping my hands is making a difference here. And I wasn't talking about the butterfly effect. I was saying, I'm contributing my voice, and it's as simple as putting my hands together. So how do we show up with what we got and that nobody else can do, and own that responsibility, right? And this is what I love about your work, Clay, and Dennis as well, and elevating Clay's voice here in this way.
Yes.
And thank you. I'm so grateful for my voice having a space here. Is that you just keep having this conversation, because you're bringing up a conversation that's so vital for this world right now. I can't tell you, it brings tears to my eyes. It's so vital.
Yeah. We've we're literally, this is episode 41, and it's taking us all over the world. A few days ago we were in Tasmania, and then we were in Rwanda, all in 1 week, and then we were home. And I thought, I didn't know I could get jet lag on Zoom, but I did.
I find it interesting. I want to toss something out as a conversational piece, that something happened when we connected the internet, that the internet was like how you have an artificial way. We have an artificial way of getting from Austin to New York. It's called an airplane. You have to get in a tube and get over there and do that. Until we can transport ourselves in either our brains or through some technology getting there. Well, when the internet connected, it was like the human being connected in a way that we could all be connected, that something, it was like an artificial web that the collective consciousness, like Jung talked about, the oversoul, or Emerson, the oversoul, that it allowed us to have an artificial way of being able to, and it lit something up, and it moved us. It impelled us into something that this is a very powerful. I mean, how is that happening? I mean, this is what how would Sarah, how much work? I mean, when Melissa and I, my wife and I, we went to Seneca Falls and went to the Women's History Museum in this last year, because we needed to spend some time there, that we needed to actually go into Susan B. Anthony's house in Rochester and to see the Stanton Bridge, and really to experience that, for us to be able to see that healing, and this, it's an extraordinary opportunity. But how hard it was for them to get together at that time, and now how is look at what it would have taken for Sarah to come about had we not had this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry. So, I remember sitting at our very first Sarah meeting, and while this energy was just flowing, something I never experienced, my attention went to the palms of my hands. I turned my hands over like this. I'm like, I wonder where the suffragist granddaughters and great granddaughters are right now. I wonder who trusted me and all these other women with carrying this on. I immediately knew I was part of a lineage, not of my own grandmother, but I knew I was tapped into something that, okay, this has got to continue. You know, this is part of an unseen, unnamed lineage. And you know, speaking of the internet, it's really fascinating that, you know, and I don't even want to question how it has shown up in the way it's shown up today, that Zoom would be as sophisticated as it is now during the time of COVID, that we would need such a way of communicating that's virtually, with exception, perfect in how it works, right?
Yep.
It's provided schools and thousands and maybe millions of organizations to do this, continue the work, to get the word out, to strategize, to find new solutions to old problems. But what we have found in our women's circles that we continue to have online, we have our monthly, we call them our virtual red tents, where we meet. Energy still flows. We can all sit back and go, wow, I could still feel that same energy rolling through me.
Yeah.
And
You know,
it works.
You know, to that point, Sandy, I've got a theory that, you know, a person goes blind, their other senses pick up. Their sense of touch, their sense of hearing, to fill in that gap of blindness. What we've temporarily lost is our sense of touch. Our sense of touch. And so I believe that our hearing and our sight, and we're becoming accustomed to looking at the screen like we're looking today, and being able to regain that sense of touch and connection. I know that I have it when I've got my weekly circle of, 18, 20 guys on the call.
Thank you.
And, something you said earlier that really rang with me. You were talking about your ancestors. When we were talking with, was it Patty down in Tasmania? Yes. He brought up a point that, when he has a men's circle, and he'd been doing it for 30 some odd years, that not only is it him in that circle, but all of his ancestors. And not only all of his ancestors, all of the ancestors of every other person in that circle. So when there's that gathering, the energy of all of that is present. And I believe that it's for us to be able to be conscious enough to bring that forth to advance us all to a better place.
Sandy, is in Judaism, isn't that an important aspect of?
Well, for me it is.
Yeah.
For me it definitely is. And it's one reason why it's traditional to name a baby after a family member who has deceased, so that name can carry on. You light a yahrzeit candle on the death to remember them. There are different traditions you do, but I personally know that I have got my grandmother, my mother who just passed in May, my mother, her mother's mother, all of my grandmothers are with me perhaps right now. Yes. Surrounding me. And sometimes that's what gets me going too. I have to remember that they're blowing in my sails. Yeah.
Yes.
I have little reminders. Yeah.
I don't know about you.
Some of them are pushing me.
I don't know about you, but to your point about our ancestors being here and our mother and our grandmother and so forth, I'm looking down now at my hands, and they're my mother's hands. And I walk by a mirror, and in my peripheral vision, I see Dad's profile. And they're present.
I love the idea of reminding, because it is literally reminding, which means that the minding was already there. It is just reminding, recognizing. It was there. I've never had a spiritual truth. I've never had an awareness that gobsmacked me, that did not say inside my brain, inside my consciousness, I knew that. Yes. It was always a reminding of what it already was the truth. Oh, and by the way, I want you to know something about us, Sandy, and we should have said this at the first of the podcast. We don't always ask questions. We sometimes just toss subjects out and stop talking. And so you get to just jump on in there. You get to just jump on in there and say what you want.
Who was it that turned the tables and started interviewing us? It's wonderful.
But it is the blessing of having you. One of the blessings of meeting you at this time in the planet is that we're seeing 41 episodes in. We're continuing to see that there is so much more going on out there than my limited perspective. It truly is like looking up out from the bottom of a hole and thinking I see the entire sky. It is that's just, and what you're helping me to do is to elevate me so that I can see a wider sky that is already there.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was listening to a call that our mutual friend Brenda Gustin was leading with Claire Du Bois from Tree Sisters. And she was talking about, what we can see is we can see, and I'm looking at these magnificent beings, these trees that are surrounding me right now. We can see the top of this tree, but we don't know what's going on in the roots down below. There's a whole nother universe down there. And it's talking, the roots are talking to each other, and it's as deep or broad as this tree is tall. And so what is going on? So there's so much, not only, I think it was in Blessed Unrest, was that the book by Paul Hawkins, that in the first, I think it was that book, where he says, and this was years and years ago, he goes, at the time of this writing, there are more nonprofits working for the greater good than you'll be able to read if you were up 24/7 reading them in a year's time. So there's so much good. That's what I was talking about, the silent majority. We've got to stop being, and I think I think now with network TV having to make way for the internet, and we have a lot of control over the internet. I mean, there's almost too many choices, but it is watering down the capitalistic voice, the voice of the one who has more power and the one that wants to drive you to, buy things that don't serve humanity and that contribute to a system that does not work.
To your point, what the internet is providing, yes, this podcast, but I'm connecting with other podcasters who are talking about the same thing. And it's this silent majority out there, the good. And if they're talking about men and compassion or compassion in general, I'm reaching out to them and connecting. And I had this vision that, for the guys, us doing our homework to learn is to develop a compassionate male podcasting network of all the podcasters in the world who have anything to do with compassion, and that we lift one another up. And so that's a tremendous benefit. And we're already doing that.
There it is.
Yeah.
And one of the things is we have to continue to make, by doing this, is that we make the willingness to do the hard, because to break something is easy. To say no is easy. to say yes is hard.
Mhm.
To say yes means you have to get out there and build something, cooperate, collaborate, work through that. The minute you say yes, it now requires an investment. Saying no just means where you just turn off, and that's where our opportunity is because we're saying yes, and we have to make something like compassion, like this, make it more out into the zeitgeist, so that we're talking about it more.
Well, and
We're
you,
working.
yeah, yeah. And Sandy, I mean, you stepped out and you went through the Charter for Compassion and you took the compassion integrity training, and now you're facilitating that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, compassionate integrity training is such a great, the way it's laid out is so remarkable, you know, and compassion integrity training is a program of Life University of the Department of Compassion and Secular Ethics in Atlanta. And I had the opportunity to take this course and then become a certified facilitator in it. And the process takes you through this 3 stages. Cultivating the self. We have to start with the self. Recognizing our capacity for empathy and regulating our nervous system. Speaking of, you know, I get upset. How do I deal with that? Well, that compassion and integrity training is phenomenal. It really takes you through some really practical steps to really put into action and make it a habit. So compassion integrity training starts with the self, then how you relate to others, and then into systems. So it really is the full picture. You don't learn about what compassion is until the 2nd series, and until your 4th or 5th week into this 10-week program, which surprised me, because I used to always start my conversations with, who wants to tell me what compassion is?
Yeah.
And see how many people, you know, didn't quite have the same, well, nobody ever had the same understanding of it. Oh, it's warm and fuzzy. Oh, you know, compassion is what you feel when someone's hurting. And I would, you know, share with them that the common definition, at least according to the Charter for Compassion is the willingness to see the suffering of another and having a willingness to do something about it.
Yeah.
So it's an action word. And how do you do that? And there's not one way.
Right.
And so recognizing when you get into the systems of it, and it's basically systems theory, you start with looking at the direct violence. You look at the tip of the iceberg, where all of those things I mentioned earlier, you know, domestic violence and, you know, wage gap and gender gap and, you know, just deforestation, all the problems that we see in our world and that we can see with our eye and feel are all held in place and supported by systemic violence, the system that allows it to happen. And then, but at the root of that, at the bottom of the iceberg is cultural violence. And for me, that was the most profound experience, that I couldn't have gotten it. I couldn't have felt it. I couldn't have really truly embodied it and seen myself walking through life knowing it without going through the first 9 parts of the workshop. But recognizing that the culture, what we allow in our world, narrative, the lexicon, and Clay, to your point about this, you know, I don't remember how you said it, but basically, how do you make it the common language of the day? When I learned about the Charter for Compassion and the Cities of Compassion initiative, Sarah decided to take on a City of Compassion. It's like, we're here, we're in Orange County, we can all go to our various cities within Orange County and start a City of Compassion. And then we thought, well, and it was at the same table, we thought, well, why don't we just do the whole state? Why don't we just do the whole state, make California a state of compassion? But we had to start at the city level. But one of the first strategies we were going to do is start getting compassion, the language of compassion, compassionate education, compassion banners, compassion flags on the flagpoles, compassion license plates, compassion everything. So people started thinking compassion, compassion, compassion. It became embedded in who we are. It was like a habit. We were creating communal pathways, not just neural pathways that we create in a habit, but a habit of the community called the communal pathway. We coined that term actually. So, so that's that, and that all starts with the self. It all
And you did
starts.
but you did that. I mean, you now have Compassionate California.
Well, Sarah, when Compassion California, the initiative of Sarah got so big, and really required a completely different team, and I also came to see that it can't be an interfaith women's organization leading it. It has to be diverse. It has to be multidisciplined. And so it got handed off, and then eventually I stepped away because I got busy with Sarah. So it is actually SB law has yet to be passed, but it's actually made it to the floor, and it got pushed off the agenda. And then of course COVID happened, so it's getting there.
It's right there.
I think there's a significant enough cities that we can now go to the state of California and say, now it's time to make it a state initiative, so it meets grassroots, meets top down.
What better time to do it than right now?
Yeah. Let's make compassion the norm.
Yeah, and make it the norm, because I was just thinking, if we reframed, before we ever started to defund or fund, or however we were going to do, if we renamed all of our police departments as peace officers.
Yeah. And
that we thought of them, and that their job was peace officer.
They were once upon a time.
And that was their job. Their job is peace. Pulling down lowering the temperature of a situation, bringing peace, and that was what we rewarded, and we rewarded them as peace officers. We have that as just as a mindset.
And there is how patriarchy creeps in. Change it from peace to police, systematically. There comes domination, there comes fear, there comes control, and it was that subtle.
And that's where we're Sande, thank you for this wonderful time. Is there anything that we have not talked about? We're going to put, Clay, you're going to put all the Sarah and how people can connect with Sande, you, Sande, and the initiatives that you have. That'll be on the console. But is there anything that we haven't talked about in this first time of getting a chance to share with you?
I spoke about us the philosophy of moving into an era of the divine feminine. According to the teachings of the Mayan calendar, we are actually in the era of the divine feminine. We're actually, according to the teachings of the Mayan calendar, are in the era of the divine feminine, known as Ish. It's pronounced E-E-S-H, Ish. And it was Grandmother Flor de Mayo, who's one of the founding 13 indigenous grandmothers, who reached out to me about 5 years ago and said, Sande, because she knew I had this network at the charter and at Sarah, and she says, I've received a mandate to spread the word that not only are we in the era of Ish, but it needs to be loudly proclaimed, that we have to, because in First Nations, indigenous, deeply spiritual people typically aren't going to be out there with bullhorns. But now it's time to be loud and proud with this. Ish is signified as a symbol on the Mayan calendar by a jaguar. And the jaguar, and it comes around every 20 days. And the jaguar represents feminine agility, strength, power, wisdom. And the spots on the jaguar represent our relations in heavenly bodies. And so each not only comes around every 20 days, but of course we're moving into this era. And so every 20 days I host Grandmother Flor de Mayo on a call like this. It's not necessarily a podcast, but it is a webinar. And
Yeah.
she brings us deep spiritual wisdom to help us into that transition. So perhaps that would be something that you might be interested in. People call in from, probably 20 different countries as an average. So it's a real fascinating way to hear another way of looking at this
Yes.
divine feminine energy. And it's called Urgent Call from the Spirit of the Feminine.
Well, I'll certainly include that, Sandy,
Thank you.
in the write-up
Thank
as
you.
well.
It's right on our homepage. Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you, Clay, for bringing us Sandy and bringing me to the table. What a gift you are, and Clay, I am so proud to be on this journey with you. What a absolute gift you are to all of us. And Sandy, thank you for giving us this time today. This is in no way, if I have anything to say about it, the last time I'm going to get a chance to be in your presence.
Likewise.
And we will thank you everyone for doing this, and we will see you next